I want you to take a second and just think about the absolute best manager you've ever had.
Oh, yeah, that's a good exercise.
Right, like hold that person in your mind, the one who didn't just, hand you a list of tasks, but actually seemed to care about your trajectory. The one who actively coached you to grow and, made you feel like a capable human being.
Yeah, the ones who actually see you.
Exactly. So, got him. Okay, now, I want you to think about the absolute worst manager you've ever had.
Oh, no.
Yeah, the micromanager, the one who basically treated you like a defective cog in a very stressful machine, just hovering over your shoulder with a metaphorical clipboard.
It is a completely visceral difference, isn't it? I mean, the gap between those two experiences dictates not just your daily mood, but your actual output. It really dictates whether you thrive or just completely burn out.
And that gap is exactly what we are plunging into today. Welcome to today's deep dive.
Glad to be here.
We are looking at some truly fascinating research into instructional supervision today. Our mission for this deep dive is to explore this wild evolution. We're going to look at how the way we manage teachers, the people who literally educate the next generation, has evolved from, well, literal puritanical religious policing into a highly sophisticated psychological science.
It's quite the journey.
It really is. And more importantly, we'll get into why getting this specific management structure right is actually the absolute key to global educational success.
Yeah, the scope of this material is incredibly rich. We're going to trace the historical paradigms of how schools were managed, dig into the modern psychology of adult learning, and then look at how all of this ties directly into global quality frameworks championed by the United Nations.
Right.
Because how we supervise a single teacher in a single classroom, it scales up to impact the entire global economy.
Okay, let's unpack this because, we really have to start in the dark ages. The early days of teacher supervision were, frankly, they were bizarre.
That's a good word for it.
Because to understand where modern education is trying to go, you have to understand the incredibly rigid, punishing systems it's trying to escape. So let's rewind to the 17th through the 19th centuries, which is an era researchers often call the inspection period.
Yeah, and inspection is certainly the operative word here. When you look at the historical literature, early supervisory schemes were strictly punitive.
Like purely about catching people messing up.
Exactly. There was absolutely no concept of coaching or professional development. None. Schools were overseen by local committees, which they called lay supervisors. And these were not seasoned veteran teachers mentoring the new hires.
So who were they?
They were local town elders, clergy, politicians.
Oh, wow. So they weren't just checking to see if the kids knew their multiplication tables.
No, not at all.
They were monitoring the teacher's personal morality and checking for religious conformity. Like, imagine your local homeowners association.
No.
Right. Imagine the HOA president, the guy who measures your grass with a ruler, getting to strictly monitor your personal life, your weekend activities, and your religious beliefs just to ensure you are, quote-unquote, qualified to do your day job.
It sounds totally absurd to us now, but the focus back then was purely on bureaucratic obedience. It was all about procedural compliance.
Just following the rules.
Right. The teacher was viewed less as a professional and more as, well, a potential moral liability that needed constant, suspicious monitoring.
That sounds awful enough, but then we move into the early 20th century, and somehow the vibe gets even more mechanistic.
Yeah, it really does.
We hit the Industrial Revolution, and the education system decides to just, copy the factory floor.
You can literally see it in the architecture of schools from that era.
Really?
Yeah. The bells ringing to signal shift changes, the desks bolted to the floor in perfectly straight rows. The school effectively became a factory. This was the age of scientific management, which was heavily influenced by Frederick Taylor's industrial concepts.
Remind us about Taylor.
Sure. Taylor was the engineer who figured out how to make steel workers and assembly lines highly efficient by timing their every movement with a stopwatch.
Oh, right, the stopwatch guy.
Exactly. So school districts looked at that unprecedented industrial output and decided to apply the exact same logic to children.
So they literally structured teaching around a production line.
They did. The students were viewed as the raw materials being shaped into products, and the teachers were just the assembly line workers.
That's so grim.
It is. Supervisors during this time, they stopped caring so much about a teacher's personal life, but they demanded sheer bureaucratic efficiency in the classroom. They used these quantitative, incredibly rigid rating scales.
Checking boxes.
Yeah, enforcing preset, inflexible methodologies. It was all about factory model classroom control and standardized metrics.
Like, did you deliver exactly this much information in exactly this many minutes? It's the ultimate cog in the machine management style.
Exactly.
But, I mean, you can't run a classroom like a Ford Model T assembly line forever, right? Because teachers and students are actual human beings. So how did the system finally break out of that factory mindset?
Well, it took a massive shift in how we understood human psychology in the workplace. Between the 1930s and the 1950s, a movement called democratic human relations took hold.
Okay.
And this was sparked by a few things, but most notably, Elton Mayo's famous Hawthorne experiments.
Oh, I've heard of those.
Yeah, so researchers went into factories to see if changing the physical environment, like turning the lighting up or down, would increase productivity.
And what they found was that the lights didn't really matter, right?
Yeah.
The workers were more productive simply because someone was paying attention to them and, like, caring about their conditions.
That was the breakthrough. Mayo proved that psychological and social factors heavily influence output. In education, this flipped the paradigm entirely.
Because suddenly they realized teachers are people.
Right. The focus moved toward collaborative teamwork and mutual trust. There was a sudden recognition that teacher morale and a cooperative institutional climate are actually direct determinants of classroom quality.
Makes sense.
If the teachers are miserable, isolated, and distrustful of management, the students will ultimately suffer.
Okay, so if the factory model dehumanized teachers and the human relations model proved that morale actually matters, how do modern schools balance the two? Because, you still need to make sure teachers are doing their jobs effectively, but you want to treat them like professionals.
That's where we get into the clinical approach. In the late 20th century, developmental paradigms emerged, recognizing that teachers aren't just a monolith.
What do you mean?
Well, a brand new teacher fresh out of college needs a very different kind of supervision than a 20-year veteran, right?
Oh, sure, obviously.
So the vehicle designed to provide that customized support is called the clinical supervision cycle. It's not a surprise drive-by inspection. It is a highly structured, collaborative, face-to-face feedback protocol.
Okay, let's slow down and walk through how this cycle actually works in practice, because this seems to be the operational core of modern educational management.
It starts with the pre-observation phase, right?
Right. The supervisor and the teacher sit down together before anyone steps foot in a classroom. They build rapport, determine their goals for the lesson, and literally agree on what observational tools will be used.
So no gotcha moments.
Exactly. They are setting the rules of engagement together. No surprises.
Okay, so they have a game plan. Then comes the observation itself. The supervisor enters the classroom to collect objective, raw data on whatever specific instructional events they agreed to focus on.
And then the supervisor takes that raw data.
Hold on, I have to push back here for a second. We just talked about escaping the factory floor and the guy with the stopwatch. Isn't a supervisor sitting in the back of the room, silently taking notes and collecting raw data? Just micromanaging with extra steps? Like, how is that really any different from the Taylor factory model? It absolutely can feel that way. In fact, when this cycle is executed poorly by a bad manager, it is just micromanagement.
Right.
But the crucial distinction in a true clinical cycle lies in what happens after the observation. The supervisor leaves the room and analyzes the data, looking for patterns, not assigning a letter grade.
Okay.
Then comes the most important part, the conference.
And what makes the conference different from just, being called into the principal's office?
The clinical conference is designed to be a strictly non-evaluative session.
Non-evaluative.
Yes. The supervisor is not there to say, you did this wrong, fix it. They are there to sit next to the teacher, review the evidence together, and jointly design an action plan. It is a shared inquiry. The supervisor acts as a mirror, not a judge.
Ah, I see. It's the difference between a health inspector shutting down your restaurant and a master chef tasting your soup and suggesting a pinch of salt.
That's a great way to look at it. And the cycle actually concludes with the teacher and supervisor evaluating the supervision itself.
Wait, the teacher evaluates the supervisor?
Essentially, yeah. They reflectively assess if the feedback process was actually helpful for the teacher's future planning.
Man, that requires a lot of humility from a manager. Asking, was my management of you actually useful? Okay, so the clinical cycle is how they manage teachers today. But the research dives deep into why this specific collaborative approach works.
It does, and it's heavily rooted in the psychology of adult learning. The formal term is andragogy.
Andragogy.
Right. We're all familiar with pedagogy, which is the art and science of teaching children. Andragogy is the specific art of teaching adults. Adult learners are inherently self-directed. They are pragmatic problem solvers.
Which makes sense. I mean, you can't just hand a 35-year-old professional a generic mandate and say, do this because I said so. Adults need to know why they are doing something, and they absolutely need their autonomy respected.
Exactly.
If a principal treats their teaching staff like a room full of disobedient middle schoolers, those teachers are going to instantly check out.
Oh, they will build up immediate resentment. And this connects to another major psychological framework from a theorist named Lev Vygotsky. It's the concept of the zone of proximal development, or ZPD.
ZPD.
Vygotsky theorized that there is a gap between what a learner can achieve completely on their own and what they can achieve with expert guidance. The ZPD is that sweet spot right in the middle.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because I like to think about Vygotsky's ZPD like training for a marathon.
Okay, let's hear it.
If your actual comfortable running level is 5 miles, and I demand you run 20 miles tomorrow with absolutely no help, you're going to collapse. That's a rigid top-down mandate.
Right.
But your potential level might be 10 miles if you have the right support. A good supervisor is like a pacer in a race. They push you slightly past your comfortable mileage, but they provide the water stations, the pacing strategy, the encouragement.
That is a perfect analogy. The supervisor provides an institutional scaffold within that zone. They support the teacher just enough so they can reach their potential without collapsing. And over time, as the teacher's capacity grows, that scaffold is slowly removed.
So a good educational manager is basically wearing a dozen different hats. They have to be a marathon pacer, a master chef, a mirror.
A systems translator.
A systems translator.
Yeah. The theoretical frameworks view schools as open systems. A school doesn't exist in a vacuum. It takes in raw resources, government policies, community needs, funding, new curricula, and it has to translate all of those inputs into a single output: student learning. Supervision is the vital feedback loop that makes that translation happen.
How does a single person actually do that? Because it sounds exhausting.
It is. Researchers break it down into a few core tasks. It's not just sitting in the back of the room observing. A good supervisor is doing direct one-on-one coaching, yes, but they are also building group development. They are creating a culture where teachers actually talk to each other and share lesson plans rather than hiding in their individual classrooms.
Right, building a community.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They are also designing professional development that actually matters, not those boring, generic lectures in the cafeteria, but workshops tied directly to what the data says the students need.
That's huge.
They are helping teachers align their daily activities with big-picture national standards. And perhaps most importantly, they are mentoring teachers to act as action researchers in their own classrooms.
Yeah, action researchers. How do you get an already exhausted teacher to do research?
By giving them the tools to analyze their own data to solve the specific problems that are driving them crazy.
Oh, I see.
Instead of a supervisor saying, your reading scores are low, use this new textbook, they say, let's look at your classroom data together and figure out exactly where the kids are getting stuck. It empowers the teacher.
Okay, this all sounds incredible in theory. We have this supportive clinical cycle, we respect adult learning, we build these developmental scaffolds. But we have to talk about the catch.
Ah, yes, the catch.
Because in reality, a school principal or a district supervisor faces a massive, fundamental structural conflict in their daily job that makes all of this incredibly difficult.
Yeah, the literature calls it the manager's dilemma, or the dual role conflict. These administrators are asked to balance two completely opposite dimensions at the exact same time. On one hand, they have an evaluative administrative role. On the other, they have this developmental supervisory role we've been discussing.
And those two roles are essentially at war with each other. From an administrative standpoint, your focus is institutional accountability. Like, are you following the rules? Are you meeting the standardized metrics? But from the developmental side, your focus is pedagogical growth. How can we make you better?
And the tools for each role contradict each other? The evaluative role relies on checklists and final judgments to decide things like contract renewals and tenure. The developmental role relies on vulnerability, joint inquiry, and admitting where you are struggling so you can actually receive coaching.
Right, so I want you, the listener, to Put yourself in a teacher's shoes for a second. Imagine you are a second-year teacher. You have a student who is constantly disrupting class, maybe even throwing chairs. You are completely overwhelmed.
A very real scenario.
You desperately need help, and you want coaching. But the person you have to ask for that help is the exact same principal who decides if your contract gets renewed at the end of the year. How can you be vulnerable and admit your classroom is out of control to the person holding your paycheck?
You usually don't. That tension is the defining challenge of educational leadership. If a supervisor cannot build enough genuine trust to separate their role as an evaluator from their role as a coach, the entire developmental framework completely collapses.
So what happens then?
Teachers default to self-preservation. They put on what's known in the industry as a dog and pony show.
Oh, I've heard that phrase.
Yeah, when the principal comes in for an observation, the teacher pulls out their safest, most rehearsed, highly engaging lesson plan. The students are prepped, it looks perfect on the checklist, but no real growth ever occurs because the teacher is actively hiding their weaknesses.
So the system just stagnates.
Yeah.
Which brings us to a massive question. Why does getting this complex psychological balancing act right matter to anyone outside the school system? If you don't have kids, or you work in a completely different industry, why should you care about the dual role conflict of a middle school principal?
Because it is the anchor for global development. The research directly links effective instructional supervision to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, specifically SDG 4, which is the goal to guarantee equitable, premium quality education for everyone.
And the reason supervision is the key to that goal comes down to one massive takeaway from decades of empirical studies. Teacher quality is the single most important school-level determinant of student success.
Absolutely.
It matters more than the facility, more than the newest textbooks, more than putting an iPad in every student's hand.
It really does. A teacher's basic university degree is just the starting line. It's not enough to sustain them through the evolving challenges of a 30-year career. Instructional supervision is the catalyst that continuously converts that basic certification into high-quality teaching practices.
It's kind of like the difference between buying a gym membership and actually having a personal trainer who makes sure you get fit and don't injure yourself.
Exactly. The UN has identified massive shifts that have to happen on the ground to achieve equitable education. Teachers have to adapt their materials to support vulnerable student groups and diverse classrooms.
Right.
They have to shift away from just teaching to standardized tests and move toward continuous diagnostic feedback on higher order skills. And they have to integrate new digital literacy tools.
None of which a teacher can just magically do on their own in total isolation. It requires a supervisor who understands adult learning, who can act as a marathon pacer, and who can build that trusting, non-evaluative environment.
Yes. Supervision isn't just middle management. It is the core quality driver ensuring global educational equity. If the supervisor fails to build trust, the teacher stagnates, the students fall behind, and those broader global targets become completely impossible to reach.
So let's pull all of this together. We have been on quite a journey today. We started back in the 17th century with local committees acting as puritanical moral police, judging a teacher's soul.
The Dark Ages.
Literally.
We're right.
Then we moved to the early 20th century, treating teachers like industrial assembly line workers with literal stopwatches. And finally, driven by a better understanding of human psychology and adult learning, we arrived at a clinical developmental coaching model.
A huge shift.
A model that tries its best to balance the harsh administrative realities of contract renewal with the delicate work of capacity building.
It is a profound evolution. We've moved from demanding compliance to fostering capability.
So what does this all mean? At its core, it means the future of our society heavily relies on how well we mentor the mentors. We ask teachers to shape the next generation, but the supervisors are the ones shaping the teachers.
That is undeniably true, though looking back at the theoretical frameworks we discussed earlier, this raises an important question and perhaps a troubling one to leave you with.
Oh, I like a curveball. What is it?
Well, it goes back to the idea of schools as open systems. We established that instructional supervision is the vital feedback loop that translates resource inputs like government policies and state curricula into teaching outputs.
Right, the translation engine.
But what if the inputs themselves are fundamentally flawed?
What do you mean?
Imagine a state or a national government passes a deeply harmful, historically inaccurate, or pedagogically unsound curriculum policy. In that scenario, does highly effective developmental supervision actually become a negative? Can even the best, most empathetic clinical coaching cycle fix a broken system? Or does excellent supervision merely force teachers to become highly efficient and comfortable at executing bad educational policies?
Oh, wow. That is heavy. If the blueprint is toxic, having a great manager just means you build a toxic house faster and you do it with a smile on your face.
Precisely.
That really complicates the entire good manager narrative. It means the system above the manager has to be sound too.
It forces us to ask what ultimately we are supervising our teachers to do.
Well, that is definitely something to chew on. So the next time you think about that best manager or that worst manager you've ever had, remember that their management style didn't just appear out of nowhere. It is the result of centuries of evolving theory, psychological tension, and systemic design. And if they were a truly great manager, they were probably building a scaffold for you without you even realizing it. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the systems around you and keep exploring how we all learn to do what we do.